The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere in the jagged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Intelligence officers in windowless rooms half a world away were already scrambling to decode what had just happened. But the men pressed against cold stone on a ridge overlooking the Korangal Valley knew only three things. Their extraction was blown, Taliban fighters were moving up the ravine below, and something had just screamed overhead at nearly treetop level, shaking loose rocks from the cliff face above their heads. Staff Sergeant Marcus Brick Rodriguez pressed his eye to his rifle scope, scanning the darkness below. Muzzle flashes bloomed like deadly flowers in the pre-dawn gloom. "Count 30-plus hostiles moving up the eastern approach," he whispered into his radio. "Request immediate air support, over." The response came from a voice he didn't recognize, calm, almost conversational with the slightest trace of a southern accent. "Raven 6, this is Hawkeye 2-7. Copy your position. Stand by for close air support, danger close authorized." Rodriguez exchanged glances with his team leader. In 12 years of special operations, he'd never heard a pilot sound so relaxed when calling in strikes within 50 meters of friendly forces. Either this aviator was insanely confident or completely reckless. In these mountains, both qualities could get you killed. What none of them knew, what the intelligence reports would later classify as the incident that changed everything, was that Captain Cassandra Reaper Voss had been waiting her entire career for this moment. Not for the firefight, not for the danger, but for the chance to prove that the skeptics, the instructors who'd called her too aggressive, the squadron mates who'd nicknamed her Crash after a training accident, were all catastrophically wrong. The A-10 Thunderbolt II banking hard over the ridgeline carried more than ordnance and fuel. It carried 8 years of doubt, condescension, and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered ready rooms. It carried the weight of being the only woman in a community that measured worth in confirmed kills and successful close air support missions. Most importantly, it carried a promise she'd made to herself during her darkest moment, that she would never let another ground team down. But as Taliban forces continued their advance up the valley, using the rough terrain to mask their approach, none of the SEALs below could have predicted that their salvation would come from the pilot they'd heard other aviators dismiss as probably better suited for cargo runs. The irony wasn't lost on the universe. The same woman they'd questioned was about to perform a gun run so precise, so devastatingly effective, that it would be studied in tactical schools for decades to come. The mountains held their breath, waiting. Hawkeye 2-7, rolling in hot. Captain Cassandra Voss had been 11 years old when she first saw an A-10 Warthog perform a demonstration flight at an air show in rural Georgia. While other children pointed at the sleek F-16s and F-18s with their graceful lines and afterburner flames, she stood transfixed by the ungainly, twin-engine beast that seemed to fly by sheer stubbornness rather than aerodynamics. Her father, a Vietnam veteran who'd called in air support during some of the war's most desperate moments, noticed her fascination. "That there's an ugly bird," he'd said, kneeling beside her. "But when you're pinned down and bleeding, when the world's coming apart around you, that ugly bird becomes the most beautiful thing you've ever seen." 23 years later, descending through the pre-dawn darkness over Afghanistan's most unforgiving terrain, Voss remembered those words with crystal clarity. Her hands moved across the A-10's controls with the muscle memory of someone who dreamed of this moment since childhood. The aircraft responded like an extension of her will, its twin General Electric turbofans adjusting thrust as she lined up her attack run. Raven 6, Hawkeye 2-7. Tally hostile forces eastern ridgeline. Confirm friendlies marked with IR strobes. Hawkeye 2-7, Raven 6. Confirmed friendlies marked. You are cleared hot, danger close. Below, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez watched his team's infrared markers pulse steadily in his night vision. The Taliban fighters had closed to within 75 meters, practically on top of them in these narrow confines. Standard doctrine called for air support to maintain at least a 100-meter safety buffer, but standard doctrine didn't account for terrain this treacherous or enemies this close. 2-7 Be advised, hostiles are mixed in with rocks and dead ground. Visual ID will be difficult. Voss's response came without hesitation. Copy that, Raven 6. I've got good eyes tonight. What Rodriguez couldn't see from his position was the methodical way Voss was processing the battlefield below. Years of training had taught her to see patterns in chaos, to distinguish the heat signature of human movement from the static warmth of sun-baked stone. Her targeting pod painted the ravine in shades of digital green, and within those electronic images, she could trace the careful advance of fighters using every piece of cover available. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barrel rotary monster that fired depleted uranium rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, was designed for tank killing. But in the right hands, with the right touch, it could thread the needle between friend and foe with surgical precision. 30 seconds out, she announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. This was the moment that separated competent pilots from legends. The first pass came without warning to the Taliban fighters advancing up the ravine. One moment they were moving tactically from boulder to boulder, using the pre-dawn darkness and broken terrain to mask their approach. The next moment, the sky tore itself apart above their heads with a sound that defied description, like the world's largest piece of canvas being ripped in half by an angry god. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had heard A-10 gun runs before, but never from this close. The distinctive BRRRRRRRT of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon seemed to shake the mountains themselves, each burst lasting exactly 2 seconds, but feeling like eternity compressed into violence. Through his rifle scope, he watched tracer rounds paint lines of destruction through the Taliban position with an accuracy that bordered on impossible. "Jesus Christ," whispered Corporal Danny Matsuda, the team's forward observer. "She's threading the needle at 50 meters." They pulled up from its attack run, climbing steeply before banking hard to the left. Even in the darkness, Rodriguez could see the aircraft's distinctive silhouette. Twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, straight wings built for low-altitude stability rather than speed. It was a machine designed for one purpose: keeping ground troops alive when everything else had failed. Raven 6 Hawkeye 2-7, how's my fires? Rodriguez keyed his radio, still processing what he just witnessed. Hawkeye 2-7, outstanding effects on target. Count 15 hostiles down, remainder retreating to the west. That was impressive. Over. There was a pause before Voss responded, and when she did, Rodriguez detected something he hadn't heard before, not satisfaction, but relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. "Copy that, Raven 6, setting up for cleanup pass, west side of your position." What Rodriguez didn't know was that Captain Voss had just performed a gun run that would be dissected frame by frame in post-mission analysis. The spacing between her rounds, the precise moment she'd ceased fire to avoid a boulder that concealed a SEAL position, the split-second timing that had eliminated threats while leaving friendlies untouched. It was a masterclass in close air support that would be studied at Nellis Air Force Base for decades. But more than that, it was vindication for every doubt she'd faced, every skeptical glance, every conversation that had stopped when she'd entered the room. 8 years of proving herself, one mission at a time, had led to this moment when technical perfection met life-or-death stakes. The second pass was even more devastating than the first. Hawkeye 2-7 rolling in from the west, friendlies stay low. Captain Voss banked the A-10 into a steep diving turn, lining up on the Taliban fighters who'd broken from their positions and were attempting to withdraw down the valley. Her targeting pod tracked their movement through the broken terrain, painting thermal images of men carrying AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades. These weren't random insurgents. Their tactical movement and equipment suggested a professional unit, probably foreign fighters with real training. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years being underestimated by her own side, while the enemy below was about to learn what happened when they underestimated both her aircraft and her capabilities. Contact, 15 hostiles moving down the valley in tactical formation. Engaging. The second gun run was shorter but more intense. Voss walked her fire across the Taliban position with mechanical precision, each burst calculated to maximize effect, while minimizing the risk to the SEALs still positioned on the ridgeline above. The 13 rounds struck with the force of small artillery shells, turning cover into deadly fragments and tactical positions into craters. Through it all, her voice remained calm on the radio. Raven 6, Hawkeye 2-7, secondary targets neutralized. I've got good loiter time if you need me to stick around. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez surveyed the valley below through his night vision scope. What had been an organized Taliban assault 15 minutes earlier was now scattered bodies and abandoned equipment. The precision of the air support had been unlike anything he'd experienced in multiple combat deployments. Hawkeye 2-7, Raven 6, outstanding work. We're going to need extraction coordinates when you're ready to pass them. Copy that. I'll coordinate with your TOC for extract birds. Anything else you need tonight? Rodriguez looked at his team, 5 special operations veterans who'd seen combat on 3 continents. Each of them was staring at the sky where the A-10 continued to orbit, its navigation lights barely visible against the stars. Finally, Corporal Matsuda spoke what they were all thinking. "Sir," he said quietly, "who the hell was that pilot?" It was a question that would echo through the special operations community for months. But for now, they were alive, and that was enough. The extraction came at dawn. 2 A-60 Black Hawks skimming low through the valley approaches, while Captain Voss maintained overwatch from above. She'd been airborne for over 6 hours, her fuel running low but her commitment unwavering. Only when the SEALs were safely aboard the helicopters and climbing toward friendly airspace did she turn her A-10 toward home. Raven 6 airborne, extraction complete, came the final transmission from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Hawkeye 2-7, thanks for keeping us alive tonight. Anytime, Raven 6, Hawkeye 2-7 RTB. But as Voss flew east toward Bagram Airfield, watching the Afghan sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and copper, she knew this mission was different. Not because of the tactical success or the lives saved, but because of what hadn't been said on the radio. No one had questioned her judgment, doubted her capabilities, or suggested that someone else might have done better. For the first time in her career, she'd been judged purely on results. The A-10 climbed steadily through the thin mountain air, carrying its pilot toward whatever came next. Behind them, the Korangal Valley settled back into its ancient silence, marked only by the fatting scars of combat and the knowledge that something significant had happened here. In ready rooms and operation centers across Afghanistan, word was already spreading about the pilot who'd thread the needle at danger-close range. They didn't yet know her name or her call sign, but they knew her work. And in a community where reputation was everything, work like that spoke louder than any introduction. The legend of Reaper, Voss, had begun, though she wouldn't learn that call sign for another 6 months. Back at Bagram Airfield, Captain Cassandra Voss completed her post-flight inspection with the same methodical attention to detail that had saved lives 6 hours earlier. The A-10's battle damage was minimal, a few small arms impacts that had barely scratched the titanium armor surrounding the cockpit. She ran her fingers along the bulletproof bathtub that protected the pilot compartment, marveling as always at the aircraft's ability to absorb punishment and keep flying. "How'd she handle tonight, ma'am?" asked Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski, her dedicated crew chief. He'd been working on A-10s for 15 years and could read the signs of a hard mission in the way pilots moved around their aircraft afterward. "Like a dream, Sergeant. She brought us all home safe." Kowalski nodded, understanding the subtext. In the close air support community, Bringing everyone home was the ultimate measure of success. Speed records and aerial victories made good headlines, but keeping ground troops alive was what mattered when the shooting started. As Voss walked toward the operations building for her debrief, she passed groups of pilots and ground crew who looked up from their conversations as she passed. Word traveled fast on military bases, especially when it involved successful danger-close missions. She could feel their eyes following her, and for once, the attention didn't feel like scrutiny. It felt like acknowledgement. The mission debrief took 3 hours. Intelligence officers wanted every detail about the Taliban fighters, their equipment, their tactical movement, their apparent training level. Operational commanders needed to understand how such a large enemy force had moved so close to a SEAL position without being detected. And the A-10 community wanted to analyze every aspect of her gun runs, from altitude and airspeed to target identification and fire control. "Captain Voss," said Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the squadron commander who'd been skeptical of her aggressive flying style since her arrival at Bagram. "That was textbook close air support. The SEALs are already asking if you're available for future operations." She nodded, accepting the praise without the defensive posture that had characterized her interactions with senior officers for years. Something fundamental had shifted during those pre-dawn hours over the Korangal Valley. She'd proven to herself what she'd always known, that competence mattered more than perception, that results trumped reputation. "Thank you, sir, just doing my job." But they both knew it had been more than that. The story might have ended there, with one successful mission adding to Captain Voss's personnel file and gradually changing perceptions within her squadron. Military careers were built on accumulated credibility. After all, an outstanding performance in combat carried more weight than years of training exercises. She'd earned her place at the table, and everyone knew it. But 3 weeks later, the radio crackled again at 3:47 hours, and this time, the voice requesting immediate air support belonged to someone who specifically asked for that pilot who worked the Korangal last month. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been reassigned to a new operation, but word had spread through the special operations community about the A-10 pilot who could thread the needle in impossible situations. "Bagram Tower, Stalker 2-1. Request immediate launch of Hawkeye 2-7 if available. We have troops in contact. Danger close authorization pre-approved." Captain Voss was already suiting up before the official mission alert came through the Squadron Operations Center. Technical Sergeant Kowalski had her A-10 pre-flight completed, and engines running within 12 minutes of the initial call, a new base record that would stand for years. "Hawkeye 2-7, taxi for immediate departure. Stalker 2-1 is in serious trouble." As she taxied toward the active runway, Voss could see other pilots and ground crew lining the flight line. Word had spread that she was launching on another danger-close mission, and the entire base seemed to be watching. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but instead, it felt like validation. This was her element. This was what she'd been born to do. "Tower, Hawkeye 2-7 ready for immediate departure." "Hawkeye 2-7 cleared for takeoff. Bring them home, Captain." The A-10 lifted off into another pre-dawn darkness, carrying its pilot toward another impossible situation where precision mattered more than bravery, where technical skill separated the living from the dead. But this time, Captain Cassandra Voss wasn't flying to prove herself. She was flying because 12 American soldiers needed her specific set of skills to survive the next hour. The transformation from unknown pilot to requested asset had taken exactly 3 weeks. The second mission was in Helmand Province, where Stalker 2-1, a 12-man Army Special Forces team, had been compromised during a village-clearing operation. Unlike the rocky terrain of the Korangal Valley, this landscape was flat desert punctuated by mud brick compounds and irrigation ditches. The Taliban had surrounded the Americans in a 3-story building, using the complex urban environment to mask their positions and prevent effective airstrikes. Hawkeye 2-7, Stalker 2-1 actual. We're surrounded in a compound approximately 2 clicks north of Checkpoint Bravo. Request immediate close air support, but be advised, we've got civilians mixed in with hostiles, and our position is compromised. Previous air assets couldn't get positive identification. Captain Voss orbited at 8,000 feet, studying the village through her targeting pod. The thermal imaging showed heat signatures throughout the compound, but distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants required the kind of precision that had ended careers when mistakes were made. Previous pilots had been forced to abort their attack runs when they couldn't guarantee civilian safety. Stalker 2-1, Hawkeye 2-7, copy your situation. I need you to mark your exact position with an IR strobe and tell me about the civilians. 2-7, we've got approximately 15 women and children in the building with us. They're terrified but cooperating. Taliban forces have us surrounded from 3 directions, using the courtyard and adjacent buildings for cover. The tactical problem was more complex than anything she'd faced during training. Standard procedure would be to wait for ground reinforcements or attempt to extract the team under cover of smoke and suppression fire. But Stalker 2-1 didn't have time for standard procedures. Intercepted radio communications indicated that the Taliban was bringing up heavy weapons and preparing for a final assault. Stalker 2-1, I need precise coordinates for each enemy position you can identify. Walk me through the compound layout. For the next 10 minutes, Staff Sergeant Kevin Bulldog Murphy, the team's forward observer, provided detailed intelligence about every building, every doorway, every potential firing position. His calm professionalism under extreme pressure reminded Voss of Rodriguez's composure during the Quarangle mission. These men trusted her completely, even though most of them had never heard her voice before tonight. 2-7, primary threat is a machine gun position in the building directly west of our location. They've got us pinned down, and they're using civilians as human shields. Voss studied the compound through multiple sensor feeds, cross-referencing thermal imagery with traditional optical cameras. The machine gun position was barely 20 meters from the building containing American forces and Afghan civilians. A single miscalculation would result in a friendly fire incident that would end her career and haunt her conscience forever. Stalker 2-1, Hawkeye 2-7 is rolling in. Keep everyone away from the west wall. The gun run that followed would be analyzed by every close air support school in the military for decades. Captain Voss approached the compound from an angle that allowed her to fire parallel to the building containing friendly forces, using the GAU-8 cannon's incredible accuracy to place 30 rounds through the machine gun position's windows, while leaving the adjacent structures untouched. The entire engagement lasted 4 seconds, but those 4 seconds eliminated the primary threat and allowed Stalker 2-1 to begin their evacuation. Outstanding 2-7, machine gun position is neutralized. We're moving civilians to the extraction point now. But the mission wasn't over. Taliban reinforcements were moving toward the compound from multiple directions, and evacuation helicopters were still 20 minutes away. For the next half hour, Captain Voss provided continuous close air support, eliminating threats as they appeared while carefully avoiding any position where civilians might be present. By the time the US-60s arrived to extract Stalker 2-1 and the Afghan civilians they protected, Captain Cassandra Voss had fired over 300 rounds of 30 ammunition without causing a single civilian casualty. More importantly, she'd saved 15 American lives and 12 Afghan civilians who would have been executed by the Taliban for cooperating with coalition forces. Hawkeye 2-7, Stalker 2-1, words can't express our gratitude. That was the finest close air support any of us have ever seen. But the highest praise came from an unexpected source. As Voss flew back toward Bagram Airfield, her radio crackled with a transmission from Stalker 2-1 actual. Master Sergeant Tony Rivera, a 20-year Special Forces veteran who'd worked with dozens of pilots during his career. 2-7, this is Stalker 2-1 Actual. I want you to know that tonight you joined a very select group. When we get back to base, we're putting in paperwork to make sure you get proper recognition for what you did here. But more than that, you've earned something you can't pin on a uniform, the complete trust of every ground unit in theater. Word's going to spread about tonight. As her A-10 climbed through the Afghan night sky, Captain Voss realized that Master Sergeant Rivera was right. She'd crossed an invisible line that separated competent pilots from legends. The technical precision was important, but what mattered more was the absolute confidence that ground units now had in her abilities. When soldiers were dying, they would specifically request her by name. 3 weeks later, they did exactly that. The third mission came from an unexpected source. A Marine Corps reconnaissance team that had been monitoring Taliban supply routes near the Pakistani border. Marines rarely worked with Air Force close air support assets, preferring their own AV-8B Harriers or attack helicopters. But when Recon Team Bravo found themselves surrounded by a Taliban force 3 times their size, they specifically requested the Air Force pilot who's been threading the needle in impossible situations. Bagram Tower, this is Viper Base requesting immediate launch of Hawkeye 2-7. We have Marines in contact, heavy contact, grid coordinates follow. Captain Voss was in the middle of a training flight when the emergency call came through. She immediately aborted her exercise and turned toward the border region, where 8 Marines were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. The flight time gave her an opportunity to study intelligence reports about the area, rugged terrain, numerous cave systems, and Taliban fighters who knew the ground better than any coalition force. Hawkeye 2-7, Viper Base. Be advised, Recon Team Bravo is surrounded in grid November Delta 4782. They've been in continuous contact for over an hour and are running low on ammunition. Taliban forces are using cave positions and prepared defensive positions. Viper Base, Hawkeye 2-7. Copy all. Request tactical frequency for direct coordination with ground element. Hawkeye, switch to tactical frequency 243.775. Call sign is Devil Dog 26. The voice that came through her headset when she switched frequencies was different from the Army and Special Forces units she'd supported previously. Gunnery Sergeant Maria Santos had the clipped, aggressive tone of a Marine Corps lifer who'd been in more firefights than most people had training exercises. There was no fear in her voice, only professional competence and absolute determination to get her Marines out alive. Hawkeye 2-7, Devil Dog 26. Situation is as follows. 8 Marines in defensive positions, grid November Delta 4782. Approximately 25 Taliban fighters using cave positions to our north and east, prepared positions to our south. They've got us pinned down with accurate rifle fire and at least 2 machine gun positions. We need immediate air support to break contact and extract. Captain Voss orbited the position at 12,000 feet, studying the terrain through her sensor systems. The Marines were positioned on a small plateau surrounded by higher ground, tactically disadvantageous, but probably the only defensible position available when they'd been compromised. The Taliban fighters were using the cave systems to move between positions without exposing themselves to air attack. Devil Dog 26, Hawkeye 2-7. I can see your IR markers and the hostile positions. This is going to require multiple passes to suppress the caves and allow your extraction. Are you prepared to move when I create an opening? Affirmative 2-7. We're ready to move when you clear our 6. The cave systems presented a unique tactical challenge. Unlike the open terrain of previous missions, these targets required different munitions and attack profiles. Captain Voss began her first attack run using the A-10's AGM-65 Maverick missiles to collapse cave entrances and eliminate machine gun positions. The precision-guided weapons struck their targets with devastating accuracy. sealing Taliban fighters inside the cave system and eliminating their ability to provide supporting fire. Outstanding effects 2-7, cave positions neutralized, we're moving now. But as Gunnery Sergeant Santos led her Marines down the plateau toward their extraction point, Taliban fighters emerged from previously unknown positions and engaged the withdrawing Marines with accurate rifle fire. 2 Marines went down in the first 30 seconds of the withdrawal. Devil Dog 2-6, we have 2 wounded and need immediate suppression fire on the ridgeline to our east. Captain Voss didn't hesitate. She rolled the A-10 into a steep diving attack, bringing the GAU-8 cannon to bear on Taliban positions that were danger close to the Marines' current location. The gun run was surgical in its precision, eliminating threats while allowing the Marines to reach their wounded teammates and continue their withdrawal. 2-7, outstanding fires. We've got our wounded and are moving to the extraction point. Can you stay with us until the birds arrive? Affirmative, Devil Dog 2-6, I've got good loiter time. For the next 40 minutes, Captain Voss provided continuous air support as the Marines carried their wounded teammates across 3 kilometers of hostile territory. She eliminated Taliban fighters who attempted to pursue, suppressed enemy positions that threatened the extraction landing zone, and maintained overwatch until 2 CH-53 helicopters arrived to extract the reconnaissance team. The final transmission from Gunnery Sergeant Santos would become legendary within the Marine Corps. Hawkeye 2-7, Devil Dog 2-6, you just saved 8 Marines tonight, and we don't forget our debts. Semper Fi, pilot, you're an honorary Devil Dog as far as we're concerned. As Captain Voss flew back to Bagram Airfield that night, she realized that something fundamental had changed in how the ground combat community viewed her capabilities. She was no longer just a competent pilot who happened to be female. She was becoming a legend in her own right. Someone that Marines, soldiers, and special operations forces specifically requested when the situation was desperate. The transformation was complete. Captain Cassandra Reaper Voss had arrived. Word of Captain Voss's capabilities spread through the military community with the speed that only combat effectiveness could generate. In forward operating bases across Afghanistan, her exploits became the subject of briefing room discussions and mess hall conversations. Pilots compared their own close air support missions to her precision work. Ground forces began requesting her specifically for their most dangerous operations. But the nickname that would define her legacy came from an unexpected source. Chief Warrant Officer Jake "Spider" Morrison, a veteran special operations pilot who'd flown everything from little birds to Chinooks, was having a beer at the Bagram Officers Club when a group of SEALs started discussing their recent operations. "I'm telling you," said Petty Officer First Class Dave Chen, still processing what he'd witnessed during a recent mission, "that A-10 pilot doesn't just provide close air support. She harvests targets like she's collecting souls. Precise, methodical, absolutely lethal." Spider Morrison, who'd worked with dozens of fixed-wing pilots during his career, leaned forward with interest. "What's her call sign?" "Officially, Hawkeye 2-7, but after watching her work 3 different AOs, we've started calling her something else." Chen looked around the table at his teammates, all of whom nodded in agreement. "Reaper, because when she shows up, bad guys stop breathing but friendlies always go home." The nickname stuck with an inevitability that surprised everyone, including Captain Voss herself. Within a month, ground units were specifically requesting Reaper by name for their most challenging missions. Intelligence briefings referred to her as the pilot who could perform Reaper-level precision in close air support scenarios. Even other pilots began using the call sign when discussing her techniques and achievements. But the most telling moment came during a mission briefing for Operation Thunder Ridge, a large-scale offensive against Taliban strongholds in the Kunar province. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the squadron commander who'd once questioned her aggressive flying style, was addressing a room full of pilots and ground force commanders about air support assignments. For the primary assault on Objective Alpha, he announced, ground elements have specifically requested Captain Voss, call sign Reaper, for close air support. Her track record in danger-close scenarios makes her the logical choice for this phase of the operation. The room fell silent. In 8 years of military service, Captain Voss had never heard a senior officer use her unofficial call sign in an official briefing. More importantly, she'd never been the specifically requested pilot for a major operation involving multiple ground units and extensive media attention. Colonel Patricia Webb, the overall mission commander, looked directly at Voss from across the briefing room. "Captain, are you prepared to provide close air support for a company-sized assault against fortified positions?" "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." "Good, because Alpha Company, Bravo Company, and Recon Team 7 have all specifically requested you for this operation. That's unprecedented in my experience, but your reputation precedes you." As the briefing continued with detailed tactical discussions and contingency planning, Captain Voss realized that she'd achieved something she'd never dared to hope for: complete professional respect based purely on demonstrated competence. The skepticism, the whispered conversations, the condescending attitudes that had characterized her early career had been replaced by something far more valuable: absolute confidence from the people whose lives depended on her skills. After the briefing, she walked across the flight line toward her aircraft, where Technical Sergeant Kowalski was performing pre-flight preparations. The looked different in the Afghan sunshine, not just a weapons system, but a tool perfectly suited to its operator's capabilities. "Ready for another big one, ma'am?" Kowalski asked, checking weapons loads and fuel quantities. "Always, Sergeant. Let's go make sure everyone comes home." But as she climbed into the cockpit and began her pre-flight checks, Captain Cassandra Reaper Voss understood that Operation Thunder Ridge would be different. This wasn't just another close air support mission. It was her opportunity to demonstrate that the legend was real, that the reputation was earned, and that the trust placed in her abilities was absolutely justified. The radio crackled as she started engines. "Reaper, Thunder Ridge Actual. Ground elements are standing by. Time to show them what precision looks like." For the first time in her military career, she was exactly where she belonged. Operation Thunder Ridge began at 400 hours with the largest coordinated assault in the Kunar province since the beginning of the war. Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 10th Mountain Division would assault the primary Taliban stronghold from the east, while Bravo Company provided supporting attacks from the south. Recon Team 7 had been in position for 48 hours, providing detailed intelligence about enemy positions and defensive preparations. Captain Reaper Voss orbited at 15,000 feet, her A-10 loaded with a full complement of weapons: AGM-65 Maverick missiles for hardened targets, CBU-87 cluster bombs for area denial, and 1,174 rounds of 30 ammunition for the GAU-8 cannon. More importantly, she carried 8 years of combat experience and a reputation for precision that had made her the most requested close air support pilot in theater. Reaper, Thunder Ridge Actual. Ground elements are in position and ready to commence the assault. Taliban forces are dug in with prepared positions and interlocking fields of fire. This is going to require surgical precision to support our advance. Thunder Ridge Actual. Reaper copies all. I have eyes on the objective area and can identify multiple defensive positions, ready to provide immediate close air support when you commence movement. The assault began with a coordinated artillery barrage that lit up the pre-dawn darkness with brief, violent flashes. Captain Voss watched through her targeting systems as 155 rounds impacted Taliban positions, followed immediately by the advance of American infantry. Through her sensors, she could track individual soldiers moving across the battlefield, their heat signatures clearly distinguishable from the cooling impacts of artillery strikes. Reaper Alpha 6. We're taking heavy fire from a bunker complex at Grid 4792. Request immediate air support, danger close authorized. The bunker complex was a hardened position carved into the mountainside, invisible to conventional attack but clearly defined in her thermal imaging systems. More challenging was its proximity to advancing American forces. Alpha Company's lead elements were less than 50 meters from the target when they called for air support. Alpha 6 Reaper. I have eyes on the bunker complex in your forward positions. Rolling in with Maverick missile, danger close. The AGM-65 Maverick struck the bunker entrance with devastating precision, collapsing the position and eliminating the machine gun nest that had pinned down Alpha Company's advance. But as the American forces continued their assault, additional Taliban positions revealed themselves through muzzle flashes and movement. Reaper Bravo 26. We've got snipers in the tree line engaging our left flank. Request suppression fire, grid follows. Captain Voss shifted her attention to Bravo Company's sector, where Taliban snipers were using concealed positions to engage advancing Marines. The tree line provided excellent cover for the enemy fighters, but thermal imaging revealed their exact locations through the heat signatures of their weapons after firing. Bravo 26, Reaper has positive identification on sniper positions, engaging with cannon fire. The gun run that followed was a masterpiece of precision flying. Captain Voss walked her 30 rounds through the tree line at exactly the right altitude, an angle to eliminate the sniper positions, while avoiding collateral damage to the forest canopy that provided cover for advancing Marines. Each burst lasted precisely 2 seconds, eliminating threats with surgical accuracy. Outstanding effects, Reaper. Sniper threat neutralized. Bravo Company is continuing the advance. For the